She just beat the defending champion of her own tournament, and the first words out of her mouth were not what you expect from a winner. No relief, no screaming, no quick thank you to the crowd, and walk off. She reached for a different word entirely. Proud. Sit with that for a second, because athletes do not usually say proud right after a brutal 3-set war. Relieved, sure, that is easy. Thrilled, of course, that is automatic. But proud. Proud is the word you use when something inside you got tested under real fire and it held. And here is what makes that word so strange in this moment. 20 minutes earlier, Alex Eala was staring at a scoreline that should have ended her. Tournament right there on the spot. She was not just losing, she was getting buried. The kind of hole where commentators quietly start talking about the next match instead of the one happening right in front of their eyes. So why proud? What actually happened in that stretch of tennis that made a 21-year-old choose that exact word to describe beating a former U.S. Open finalist on American soil in front of an American crowd? By the time this video ends, you are going to know exactly what she meant. Not the polite headline version, the real one. The one buried inside a stat nobody bothered to put in a title, and a quote that most outlets clipped way too short. But we are not there yet. First, you need to see just how far behind she really was, because that number is going to shock you. Let's rewind for a second, because if you are just meeting this story, you need to understand exactly who you are watching, and why this particular win means so much more than one line in a bracket. Alex Eala is 21. She is from the Philippines. Right now, she sits at number 28 in the world, and that ranking sounds respectable on its own until you realize what she had to walk through to earn it. This is a player who, just weeks before this match, stepped onto center court at Wimbledon and beat Iga Swiatek. Not a lucky Swiatek, not an off-day Swiatek. A 6-time Grand Slam champion Swiatek in front of a crowd that came to watch someone else and left talking about her instead. So when Eala walked into Washington, D.C., she was not some unknown underdog hoping to sneak a nice run. She was a rising threat with real weapons, and everyone left in that draw already knew it. Her opponent was Leylah Fernandez. And if that name rings a bell for American audiences, it should. Fernandez made a run all the way to the U.S. Open final back in 2021, and she walked into this Washington Open as the defending champion. This was her tournament, her title to defend, her home continent, her comfort, her crowd cheering for her name. On paper, this was supposed to be the kind of match where the champion reminds everybody exactly why she won it in the first place. Here is a detail that matters more than it looks. Fernandez plays left-handed, and going into this match, Eala had a losing record against lefties. Marketa Vondrousova beat her, Lulu Sun beat her, and Fernandez herself had already beaten Eala once this year, back in Stuttgart. So this was never just about protecting a title. This was about a pattern, a real blind spot in Eala's game that kept resurfacing every single time a left-hander stood across the net from her. The final score says Eala won in straight sets. 6-2, 7-6. Clean. Simple. The kind of scoreline you glance at once and scroll right past. But that scoreline is lying to you. It hides the fact that Eala flew through the first set in just 34 minutes, looking every bit like the better player on the day. And it hides what happened right after, when Fernandez finally woke up and reminded everybody in that stadium exactly why she is a Grand Slam finalist. Because for a stretch in that second set, this match was not close. It was not competitive. It was completely one-sided, and Eala was on the wrong end of it. We are talking about a lead so big that most players never claw their way back from it. A lead that should have sent this match into a third set with every ounce of momentum sitting in Fernandez's hands. A lead that, if you had looked away from your screen at that exact moment, you would have come back expecting to see Eala's name sitting in the loss column. So this is where the real story begins. Not with the final score. With the collapse that almost happened first, 5-1. Say it slowly and let it actually land. 5-1 in the second set, right after Fernandez had already found her rhythm and started playing the exact brand of tennis that took her to a Grand Slam final in the first place. At this point, the entire story of the match had flipped. The player who cruised through set 1 in 34 minutes was suddenly the one scrambling, chasing, hoping. Fernandez was finding her spots. Her forehand kept landing deep. Her serve, shaky early on, was suddenly clicking into place. And Eala looked exactly like what the rankings said she should be, the player one rung below the champion, getting reminded of that fact in real time. If you were sitting in that crowd, you were already thinking about a third set. You were already recalculating your afternoon, wondering if Fernandez was about to do what defending champions are supposed to do, which is find a way when it matters most. So here is a question worth sitting with. What actually happens inside an athlete's head at 5-1 down? Not in theory, not in some coaching manual. In that exact moment, on that exact court, with a former U.S. Open finalist locked in across the blank, net, and a crowd that is starting to sense a blowout. For most players at this level, the honest answer is simple. You start playing loose. You start reaching for shots you have no business taking, because being down that far makes patience feel like giving up. You press. And pressing against a hot opponent almost always makes everything worse. Eala did not do that. What she did instead barely shows up in a highlight reel, because none of it looks dramatic in the moment. She held her next service game. Then she held again. Then she started leaning into Fernandez's service games, stretching out the rallies, forcing her opponent to hit one more ball than she wanted to hit. Slowly, without one single explosive highlight to point to, the score started crawling back. 5-2, 5-3, 5-4. By the time it hit 5-5, something had shifted across the entire stadium. Whatever energy belonged to Fernandez 10 minutes earlier was gone, and now it belonged to Eala. Here's the second question, and honestly, this one matters even more. Was this luck, or was this a decision? Because after the match, Eala answered that herself, and it is worth hearing exactly how she put it, not some cleaned-up paraphrase. She said she knew Fernandez was playing a little better, and that her own level had dropped a bit in that stretch. It is not a dramatic quote. It almost sounds understated, but listen to what it actually reveals. She was aware, in real time, that she was losing ground. Not in denial about it. Not panicking about it either. She was diagnosing the problem while it was still happening to her, live, in the middle of the storm. That is a different skill than raw talent. That is a different skill than a big serve or a clean forehand down the line. That is the ability to watch yourself falling behind and stay calm enough to ask why, instead of just drowning in the fear of it. Fernandez eventually held serve one more time and dragged the set into a tiebreak, which means every ounce of that comeback, every one of those 5 straight games, all of that hard-won composure, came down to one final stretch where a single loose shot could erase all of it. A tiebreak against a former Grand Slam finalist, on her home continent, with the match and their entire head-to-head history hanging on it. This is usually where these stories fall apart. This is the part where the young player, after fighting so hard to crawl back into the match, finally runs out of nerve at the exact moment she needs it most. We have all watched that version play out before, on this exact stage, in this exact sport. But there is one detail from what happened next that almost nobody talked about afterward. One number, buried deep in the match stats. That explains this win far better than the final score ever could. And once you see that number, you will understand why proud was never really about the scoreboard at all. Here's the number nobody bothered to put in a headline. 42. That is how many unforced errors Leylah Fernandez made in that match. 42, on her home continent, as the defending champion, against a player ranked below her. 42 times, the ball came off her racket and landed somewhere it was never supposed to land. On the surface, that number makes this whole story feel smaller, like the takeaway is simple. Fernandez had a bad day. She cracked, and Eala got lucky because her opponent fell apart. That reading is wrong, and here is exactly why. Go back to that 5-1 stretch. Fernandez was not making errors then. She was playing clean, aggressive, confident tennis, the kind that wins Grand Slam finals. Those errors were not happening because she is some fragile player having a rough afternoon. They started happening later. They started happening only after Eala had clawed her way all the way back from 5-1 to level the set, which means the pressure did not just appear out of thin air. Eala built it point by point, game by game, for nearly 45 straight minutes. She did not overpower Fernandez in that stretch. She did not blast winners past her. She simply refused to disappear, forcing Fernandez to keep producing her absolute best tennis over and over and over again, until finally, the tiny margin for error that exists in every single shot a professional hits, quietly closed. And that is the twist hiding in plain sight. What looks like Fernandez losing the match was actually Eala winning it, just not in the way we are trained to notice. We watch tennis and we celebrate winners. The clean forehand down the line, the ace out wide. Those moments are loud, they are easy to clip and post and replay. But there is another way to win a tennis match, one that is almost invisible if you are not looking closely for it, and here it is. You simply make the other player hit one more ball than she wants to hit, over and over, until her own hand starts to shake, under the weight of her own shots. That is not luck. That is a strategy that requires something most 21-year-olds have not developed yet, the patience to trust that if you just stay in the point long enough, the math eventually starts working in your favor. And this is exactly what Eala told us herself, if you actually listen to the words she chose. She said patience was key, not power, not aggression, not some tactical fix to her serve or her return position. Patience. She said she was trying to work it out, trying to keep a strong mentality, trying to find solutions. Read that quote again and notice what is missing from it entirely. No mention of hitting harder, no mention of taking bigger risks. She is describing a mental process, not a technical one. She is describing the exact opposite instinct of what almost every young player defaults to when they fall behind a bigger name. Most players speed up when they start losing. She slowed everything down. And that is the real answer to the question we started this whole story with. Why proud and not relieved? Because relieved is what you feel when something happens to you and it just happens to turn out fine. Proud is what you feel when you make a decision under real pressure, and that decision is the reason it turned out fine. Eala was not relieved that Fernandez fell apart. She was proud that she was the one who made her fall apart, using nothing but patience and a refusal to panic at 5-1 down. That single detail reframes the entire win. This was never really about forehands, or serves, or even that final tiebreak. This was about a 21-year-old proving to herself, live, on one of the biggest stages of her career so far, that she can stay level-headed when everything around her is screaming that she should not be able to. And here is the part that should genuinely catch you off guard. This was not the first time we saw this exact pattern from her in this exact tournament. If you think what just happened against Fernandez was a one-time thing, some lucky escape that will never repeat itself, you need to rewind 48 hours earlier to Eala's very first match of the whole tournament. Her opponent that day was Zheng, not just any player, an Olympic gold medalist, a former world number 4. Someone who, on paper, should have ended Eala's Washington run before it even had a chance to get started. And once again, Eala lost the first set. Same story. Same setup, a dangerous, decorated opponent seizing control early, and Eala starting from behind against someone the entire draw expected to beat her comfortably. So what did she do? She came back. 6-4, 6-1, after dropping that first set 4-6, not a nail-biter squeaked out at the end. A genuine statement where she outplayed an Olympic gold medalist across the final 2 sets after starting the match on the back foot. And when she talked about that comeback afterward, listen closely, because it connects directly to everything we just walked through with Fernandez. She said she already had that comeback mindset inside her. She said she has had more experience now to bring that mindset out at the higher level. Read that carefully. She is not describing a lucky bounce or some tweak to her tactics. She is describing a mindset, something repeatable, something she can reach for whenever she needs it, not something that just happens to show up when the universe feels generous. 2 matches. 2 completely different opponents. One, a Grand Slam finalist, the other, an Olympic champion. 2 times losing early control of the match, and 2 times the exact same response. No panic, no collapse. Just a slow, patient climb back into a match everyone else had already mentally filed away as a loss. At this point, this is not a coincidence anymore. This is a pattern. And patterns are what separate a feel-good story from a real trend worth actually paying attention to. Here is something else worth knowing, because it proves this is not just fans online getting swept up in a good week of tennis. Andy Roddick, a former US Open champion himself, someone who has watched every kind of player come through this tour, went on his own podcast and called what is happening around Eala a movement. Not a moment, a movement. He said she is single-handedly building a following in tennis that genuinely did not exist a couple of years ago. When a former Grand Slam champion reaches for a word like movement instead of hype or buzz, that is worth sitting with for a second. Roddick has watched hundreds of promising young players pass through this sport. Most of them get talked about for one season and quietly disappear. He is not describing Eala like one of those players. And here is where this story stops being about one tiebreak in Washington and starts being about something much bigger. Eala is currently sitting just 5 ranking points behind Emma Navarro, an American player, for a new career high ranking of her own. 5 points. That is nothing. That is one good match away. If this exact pattern we just watched, twice, in the same week, against a Grand Slam finalist and an Olympic champion, keeps repeating itself, that gap is going to close fast. And it will not stop at one moment either. It keeps closing, match after match, because patience under pressure is not a skill that fades over time. It compounds. So now we finally know what proud actually meant. Not relief that she survived one dangerous match. Pride that the exact mental approach she has been quietly building is now showing up, reliably, against the best players in the world, exactly when it matters most. Which brings us to the only question left worth asking. So when Alex Eala said she was super proud, she was never really talking about a scoreline. She was talking about proof. Proof that the version of herself who can fall behind, stay calm, and claw her way back through nothing but patience is not a one-match fluke. It is who she actually is now, under real pressure, against real champions, on real stages that matter. And that matters more than any single trophy ever could, because trophies come and go, but a mental pattern like this one shows up match after match, season after season. It is the difference between a player who has one great week and a player who builds an entire career on being the one who simply does not break when everyone expects her to. That raises a bigger question for the sport itself. Women's tennis right now is wide open. There is no single dominant favorite walking into every tournament anymore. There is a gap at the top, and a lot of players are racing to fill it. Most of them are trying to fill it with bigger serves, flashier shots, louder weapons. Eala is trying to fill it with something much harder to teach, and honestly, much harder to beat. But composure only gets truly tested when the stakes climb higher. And Eala's next test is about to get a lot harder. Her quarterfinal opponent will be either Alina Svitolina, a former world number 3, or Polina Kudermetova, a player who has actually beaten Eala twice already. Different challenge, different flavor of pressure, and a real test of whether this patience she keeps talking about holds up against someone who will not hand her the same openings that Fernandez and Zheng did. So here's the real question this story leaves you with. We have now watched this exact mental pattern twice in one single week. Down a set, down a break, and still finding her way back through nothing but composure. Does that hold up a third time against an opponent who already has her number? We are about to find out. And if you want to see exactly how that quarterfinal unfolds, stay close, because this story is nowhere near finished yet.